been clear throughout this forum today that the Green Party supports the solutions to affordable housing being both in the private and the public sector. The private sector, by its very nature, is not going to develop non-market housing. Its role is to develop market housing. And so what the federal government can do in terms of stimulating the development of affordable housing through the market sector, through the private sector, is to offer tax cuts for affordable housing. It's as simple as that. We've talked the various mechanisms for doing that, but certainly it would be to change the tax laws in both the initial investment, the costs themselves, including building costs, and that could be done perhaps in negotiation with local governments because they assess the fees on new building. And secondly, certainly in the maintenance in terms of the changes, as we've just discussed, on capital gains rollover, etc. In terms of the public sector, I believe our party believes that there is a role that has been dropped from the federal government agenda and the mandate of CMHC that did supply money and then through the agency of CMHC to builders of co-op housing, social housing, and other forms of non-market housing. There is an absolute need for the federal government to get back into that role. We're the only G8 country without a national housing plan and an involvement of the federal government at that level in non-market housing. Those are the two solutions.
Rent control where it makes sense and where it doesn't alter a local economy, but to help people who need help. And investment, yes, but the kind of investment that I think helps build a healthy community. I'll give you an example of each. Investment that is good or not for a community. There's, I think, a very healthy and a very good demonstration of how democracy should work in the consideration of casino expansion in Vancouver, right? That was investment coming in not for housing, but a kind of investment that was going to come to a community. And people came forward and they debated and they had a discussion at City Council and it went forward. Now, at times it was messy, sometimes it was divisive and heated, but that's how democracy sometimes is. But I think that works well when people listen and the public has an opportunity to have feedback. So investment, yes, but it has to be in the longer term goal of improving the quality of life of people who are going to be living not only in that development, but around that development and what it'll mean for a community. With regard to rent controls, where it makes sense, not obviously a blanket, but where it makes sense. When I went to university in Prince George, there were all kinds of students who lived up in New Ianish and the Nass Valley who had only had the opportunity to come to Prince George to have an opportunity at post-secondary education because they had social housing, because we have our Aboriginal housing project up there, the largest co-op housing for Aboriginal students is in the city of Prince George, and it's meant upward mobility opportunities, a chance to get education, a chance to get to have more choice in life for Aboriginal students in northern British Columbia because we have rent controls and social housing. So there are examples of success and failure in both dynamics, and I think there's lots to be learned. And I don't think a blanket rule about one or the other, even though that's how the question was phrased. I think that's an oversimplified way of thinking about it.
I lived through the rent controls in this province. In fact, I was a tenant and I was an individual who successfully took a landlord through the process and won on rent control. So I remember all of that. I don't think it's really a debate today. I would say this. I think if we get to a situation of blanket rent controls, it means that the system is in failure. I think rent controls, and when any level of government, and usually it's provincial, it might be civic, when they go to the lengths of a blanket rent control, it's because there is a crisis that's being driven by consumers, tenants, who are saying, rents are skyrocketing so much we can't afford to live anymore. I think what we have to do is not get to that point. I think if we can focus our energy and attention in a kind of non-partisan way and develop a national housing strategy that involves local government as outlined in Bill C-304 that the NDP has put forward and has been supported in the House of Commons, I think we have a much better chance in harnessing where there's actually agreement on what we can do so that we don't face a sort of a crisis where you use such a blunt instrument as a blanket rent control. So I don't sense that we're there at that point. And I talk to lots of tenants, and I'm not sensing that we're at a debate of rent control. So I appreciate that you brought it up, because I'm sure that probably most of the people in this room do not support it. But frankly, I don't think that's where the discussion is at right now. I think we're in a very different place than where we were in the 80s on this question. And I think that let's focus our attention on some of the things we've talked about today that would bring us to an overall plan that would improve the affordability, both in terms of home ownership and rental housing in Metro.
Obviously, as Libby and everyone else said, rent controls are either municipal in some instances or provincial. So we can't speak about what we will do as a federal government because it's not under our jurisdiction. But we want to talk about stimulating building either through investment or through taxes. We've talked about that all morning. What are the various ways you can use tax instruments to help to stimulate investments? What are the ways you can look at Crown land or Canadian land in which you can put forward in many of the cities to create places to build? How can CMHC strongly get back into co-op housing and refinance for densification? I mean, there are lots of ways in which the federal government can play a role in stimulating housing. I think that's what we're going to have to talk about. But I want to reiterate that the only way we can do it is to sit at the table with all of the partners as equal partners and decide what's the best way to go, and to set clear targets and find ways to evaluate if what we're doing well, and to look at other places in which, and other provinces in which they have got some great ideas, and follow up with those ideas. I think that's really basically it. I think we've reiterated that a couple of times now. I won't go into all of the incentives, the tax incentives, and CMHC is really important as well. So, I think that's where the federal government has a jurisdiction, and that's what we need to talk about.